with our normal prayer for teacher and student. By now you're familiar with it, and please feel free to join in. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunuktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So, as I understand it, the topic is, let me just refresh my memory on this, what pain teaches. We don't often think that pain is a teacher. More than likely, our objective in life is to try and avoid as much pain as possible. And as we know, pain comes in several areas. I don't think a child is very happy when they're born. When they were in the mother's womb, they were safe and secure. They may have heard the distant drumbeat of the mother's heartbeat. It was nice and dark. It was warm. And all of a sudden, they burst into sunlight. I know they can't see, but still, the clamor, the noise, the directness of the noise, and also the trauma of exiting, probably in an unwilling way. In some way, biology once puts them in a position ready to be born. But there's every reason why they start crying. Of course, there's a biological reason. They want to take their first gasp of air. And then the severance, final independence, the severance of the cord. And if you were to write a biography, you might say, and that's where the trouble began. Most people are trying to avoid pain and developing a strategy to do so, but as you know, it's unavoidable. Pain is an inevitable part of life. And if you take it as a kind of syndrome of two opposites, you can say that maybe life is a struggle between pleasure and pain, or pain and the absence of pain, or happiness and pain. These two extremes, we want the one, we don't want the other. And we've tried many different methods. One thing that we are certain about is unity prevents pain, unity of every kind. And the aspiration for unity is always there. In human relationships, they want a unity. No doubt driven by an urge for perpetuating the creation. And there's every reason why we want a United Nations. We want people to come together so that we don't have any disruption to harmony. And pain comes to us, of course, at different levels. Physical pain, of course, is there. And physical pain is inevitable as long as we are in a juxtaposition to a world and a sensitivity of the skin. And pain then is useful to us because it draws the blood to a specific area of difficulty. And internally, the body tries to solve the problem. And if the blood is left free to do its job, then the problem is solved. But very often in modern day life, physical pain is caused by ourselves. As you know, we repeat this word Shanti 3 times because pain or disruption to peace and harmony is often from the causal law that we ourselves are involved in. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction, as we know. It's just a physical law. And there's no effect without a cause, or a cause without an effect. It's an ongoing cycle of events. What is the primary cause of our difficulties? Wrong thinking. We have decided that we'll value the world in such a way that we'll develop a strategy that prevents and avoids pain. But here, what I'm saying as a topic is that pain is a teacher. The Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters to it. Each one is a yoga that is seeking this union that will solve this problem of a painful existence. Probably the most painful thing we can ever think of would be a bereavement. Now we shifted beyond a physical level of pain to a psychological level of pain. This is really connected with a disunity or feeling of disunity that we have with other entities, other people, places, and events. The emphasis on our own duality, our own personality, our own individuality, that sets up a duality with others. And we know that life, in all its complexity, even at the atomic level, wants a kind of unity, wants a kind of freedom, and is fighting against a duality and a plurality. Let's take the simple atom. The electron, buzzing around, as it were, the proton, it doesn't fall into it because it wants to maintain a separation. I brought this up that at a university once, University of Dublin, or university, yes. And I was in a kind of a debate with an atheist. And I mentioned this, actually quoting Swami Vivekananda, that every atom is looking for its own freedom. And one person, a reductionist materialist student, said, do you mean to say that every atom is sentient? I said, yes. Can you please disprove it? I can't prove it, I can't disprove it. But what I know is that the electron that is so inclined electronically to fall into its opposite, negatively charged, with the proton being positively charged, naturally there'll be attraction. What prevents it? Scientifically speaking, we know now what prevents it. It's called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Electrical energy is designed in such a way that we don't know where a particle is when it's moving. And when it's moving, we don't know where it is. And when we see where it is, we don't know how fast it's moving. This is the great uncertainty principle, which enables electrical unions to occur. So what is the electron trying to do? It's trying to move out, it's trying to move away. It's trying to not be detected. It's trying to find its freedom. And the proton wants to separate itself from all the other protons in the universe. It is drawn in by gravity. The gravitational separation comes when the electrical energy wants to fly out. It's an antithesis to gravity. So the whole of life is connected with freedom, and freedom from what? Psychologically, freedom from pain. Nobody wants it. How to avoid it? Now, we mentioned that bereavement is probably the most severest pain of all. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is all centered around that. And every chapter, as I mentioned, is called a yoga. It wants a unity. The first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called, actually, Arjuna Vishada Yoga. That is the yoga of Arjun's absolute despondency. Arjuna finds himself in a psychologically painful moment, disturbed by the prospect of death. At his hands, no doubt. He's a great warrior. He's had no problem with this issue in previous episodes of his life. A very skilled archer. There's no other that can really compete with him competently. And yet he's in this state. And we know from the description, it is not just a mild depression. It is a severe pain. And the pain is of a nervous breakdown to that extent. The second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita gives us a wonderful psychological profile. It starts with brooding on objects. Brooding means we see an object that we want and we are fixated on it. We won't rest until we've gotten it. If it wasn't for continuously brooding on it or continuously drawing our attention toward it, the situation wouldn't arise. The will to pursue it in such a way that will possess it does not arise. It doesn't come from the object. It doesn't come from the senses. although they're alighting on the object, it comes from an internal movement, a kind of prospect that says, within me is a gap, some unfulfilled area that I have to fulfill from the outside. Because all of our consciousness, that is our birthright, is all flowing toward the outside through the senses. And what gives us the problem is the connection between the mind, the senses, and the objects. If we were able to sever that connection, what would our condition be? Sixth chapter gives us a very beautiful definition of yoga, not normally understood. We think that yoga means a union, and it does, of course. Yoga, the term, is derived from two roots, similar in meaning, yuj and yajir, something that joins together, and also concentration. And in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, yoga means this. The philosophy of yoga is concerned with an apparent individuality wanting to unite with some more fundamental, enduring element. And what will be the result of it? Will be pain-free. If we separate that, we'll be free from this internal pain. And the internal pain's connection with the body is that when we think in certain ways, the effect must be everywhere. It must be on the mind, it must be on the body as the first port of call, and it must carry through to the environment. Such a repercussion from a single thought, and the thought, when repeated as it must be habitually, will draw into us whatever we think, whatever we desire, whatever emotion comes up, whatever condition the mind is in, wherever we steer the attention, either consciously or unconsciously. Mainly, it's unconsciously. What we call the habit area, the habit level. Tam vidyad dukasam yoga viyogam, yoga samnitam. Na nishayina yoktavyo yogo nivina cetasa. Let the severance of the connection with pain be known by the name of yoga. What is yoga? Is it a unity? Not according to this definition. It actually is the severance from the connection with pain. When we take pain and make a separation from it, don't identify with it. In other words, don't identify with the organ that is experiencing it. We somehow can withdraw into an area of inner poise. In other words, the consciousness which is flowing outward, we systematically, scientifically draw it inwards and center it in an area. And the ultimate centering process is what we call meditation. And that is why this particular stanza is found in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is all concerned with meditation. Dhyana yoga, meditation. This yoga should be practiced. Which yoga? The practicing of severing your identity, your so-called individuality, with this instrument of pain and with the experience of pain. If we can manage that, then this is called yoga, because the consequences of it is that there's an automatic union with who you are. It's not that who you are was ever separated from a separate you. It was always there, waiting as it were. Come on, come on. Can you now divest all your superficial layers, and can you now enter into this area of poise where you will find a unity, where you will find a freedom? There's no need to fly off anywhere. There's no need to fill a gap. There's no gap there. It was only your perception that there was a gap there. It was only because you thought more has to be done, more has to be achieved. Like an empty bucket, it has to be filled from the outside. Am I really a whole empty vessel that needs to be filled? Am I an entity that has to pray all the time, constantly, please fulfill me, please give me this, please give me that. Please remove my sorrow, Every time we say, please remove my sorrow, it's an endorsement of our sorrow because it's a shifted thought. And thought has its repercussions. Can't avoid it. There's nothing more powerful than thought. Thought moves like quicker than a photon, quicker than the speed of light. Speed of light traveling at so many 186,000 miles per second, faster than that, faster than the blink of an eye. Now we can test this out. When I was in London, I gave a little demonstration of how the body is a magnetic field. And this created much curiosity, and we can experiment like that. How far does this field go? Now, if you think that the mind has no boundaries, if the mind is like a huge ocean, if you will, with no horizon in view, and then what you think will have its ripple effect everywhere, putting it into a pool of mental processes. If you think that, then you can be sure to direct all your thinking in a fully conscious way, in a way that will produce a result, whether it's good or bad. Those people who learn to meditate, some of them were not good people. Nevertheless, they were meditators. Let us take, for example, in the story of Rama, we come across this great Rakshasa, Ravana. He got all his powers by meditating. Where does he get them from? He gets them from Brahma. What is Brahma? Brahma is the creative mind, the divine mind that produces and creates everything from thought. Naturally, when you verbalize your thinking processes, you have access to this cosmic mind without a horizon. And in agitating this, it all condenses in a systematic way, a kind of drama played, and it crystallizes as all the people and the scenes and the events in front of you. You, in this sense, are the creator of your own world. And you have no business to complain when you're not happy with the world. This is why we repeat Shanti 3 times, because the one is, let me avoid disturbance, please, caused by myself, my wrong thinking. Let us shift the thinking then and see what happens. We create a better world. Not only will we create a better local environment called body, we'll create a peace of mind, but we'll also create a power. We'll be a powerhouse that can have its reaches in the farthest corners of the universe. We'll be a light that illumines the whole world. Such a light, the light of Asia, is a Buddha. I mentioned Buddha today because in a few days' time, it is a Purnima, that is a full moon, that celebrates the birth of Buddha. Traditionally, of course, we have had celebrations here at the ashram this year for various reasons. This is not so because it arrives on a Monday anyway. But what is this great mind Buddha, and what was he concerned with? Was he concerned with God? No, Buddha is essentially, at least minimum, agnostic. Some say even atheistic. They don't put a God in there. Of course, for practical purposes, the human need is to mobilize the emotional forces and direct it to a higher power. And so Buddha himself, in many Buddhist countries and many Buddhist cultures, has become a deity. But Buddha himself never wanted that. And in true Buddhism, they say, Buddha was just a man, just a human like you and me, whose circumstances drove him toward a reevaluation of life. Ultimately, with a blank sheet, with no map, no compass, sitting down under a tree, he now goes through the whole processes of stabilizing the mind until ultimately a revelation comes by itself. And it is not a nothingness, it's not a shunyata, it's not an emptiness, because Buddha himself means one who is enlightened, one whose intellect is enlightened. You have to mobilize the intellect in order to investigate what is sitting behind it, and the realization dawns. The intellect is a reflection of an inner light, and that inner light is the shining light that enlightens the mind and makes one of enlightened intellect, namely a Buddha. Buddhi, intellect. What is the cosmic intellect? It is Brahma. Therefore, whatever thought we have goes into the deposit box, the cosmic deposit box called Brahma, that then takes your order, something like a cosmic Argos, disappears into the back and brings out what you want and delivers it to you directly. This is what we call our world of pain and pleasure. How is it a teacher for us? It is a teacher because we learn much more from pain than we do from joy. It is the painful moments that allows us to look upward. Let us bear in mind, for example, an elaborated story taken from the Mundaka Upanishad, familiar to us, two birds on a tree, one radiant and full at the top, beaming perfection and brilliance, the other one shifting and drifting about in the lower branches of the tree, tasting the bitter and sweet fruits of life. Even in nature, we can observe birds doing this. We think that the birds are so serene when they fly. I would like to be like a bird, get that freedom. Yes, but why are they flying? They're constantly looking for food. They don't have peace of mind at all. They're looking how to construct a nest, how to search for food, how to bring that food to chicks in the nest. Constant activity, constant looking. The eye is always shifting, always alert for food opportunities. And a wonderful communication style that when it finds something, manages to communicate to all its friends and bring them to the party so they can all have a feast. Other birds bigger than that will compete. So we see this element of competition in nature. We see this urge to get food. In other words, satisfy the senses. And this then, according to Buddha, is the key to all our difficulties. Like a clinician, simply like a medical practitioner, like a doctor, not mentioning any God whatsoever. And the same passage is here, severance from pain. In a clinical way, just saying, here's the cause of your misery, here's the cause of your pain. Now, Patanjali puts that as the various pain-bearing obstacles, technically called kleshas. Of course, the primary one is our own ignorance. That means our own different way of thinking of things, relating to the world. We take it as real, and it's not. Not in a permanent sense, only in a relative sense. Relative to the senses, relative to our position. Shift your position, the reality shifts along with you. Transcend your position, the reality that we had endorsed disappears totally. So let us say impermanence. In an impermanent world, how do we survive? How do we thrive with a limited optical horizon that we have? Then we go and taste the bitter and sweet fruits of life. When I think of this, I often think of the August season in Ireland, where you get the blackberries. And of course, every child and every adult, they go with baskets, picking blackberries and eating them on the way with a great deal of joy. And the joy is added to by the scene of a sunny day and the smell of fresh, warm air and the flowers, maybe even a babbling brook. And then these fruits are seen, tiny fruits. We don't have these in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, we have bigger varieties called mulberries, a different kind of species completely. But children do the same thing. They go and they pick them with all black, purple stains on their mouth, and be careful not to get it on your clothes. Visually, we don't really know if the blackberry is sweet or sour. And we are prepared to experiment. In this way, the bird on this tree, exploring the lower branches of it, wants to find the sweet fruits. Just like us, we want the sweet fruits of life because it's a double movement. We want the sweet fruit on the one side. We want to avoid the bitter on the other. And so we are prepared to actively go from branch to branch and incessantly look for this. Inevitably, what we find as pleasure is preceded and followed by pain. If it wasn't like that, we would be satisfied. If a child says, please give me an ice cream, then once it's finished the ice cream, it doesn't want another ice cream, it's full. The following day, however, it might want. And whenever it occurs to them, they may want something like that. Human beings also want to compensate their pain and their misery with food or some other sense pleasure as a compensation, which could in fact become an addiction. A good example is familiar to many, going on the private chocolate trail, thinking that it will divert the mind sufficiently and stimulate the pleasure chemicals so that they don't have to deal with the painful situation. They can avoid it completely. But it is like the waves in an ocean. If you get a pleasure, it is followed by a pain, followed by a pleasure, and so it goes on. It's an endless cycle. Understanding this cycle and the cause of it, desire, Buddha brings out four noble truths. Very simple. It says, there is pain, there's no doubt. I'm not going to suggest anything supernatural here. I'm just going to state the plain fact that everybody experiences the same thing. Pain. It can be physical. It can be emotional. It can be tied in with your own self-image and how you relate to people and how people see you. But whatever it is, whether it's a bereavement caused by an attachment, caused by, of course, in deep sorrow, missing the person, whether it's caused by this or other things, the cause of pain is desire. The cause of pain is this seeming understanding that everything is empty and has to be filled. Or at least there are moments of emptiness and moments of filling, and my life will be like this. And we can put it in a different way, according to this example in the Mundaka Upanishad, that we are hungry, we don't want bitter fruits, we only want sweet fruits. And there's a trial and error element to it. So that sometimes a bitter fruit is tasted more bitter than anything else. And the teacher in it says, let me now take that and look upwards. Let me look away. Let me revalue things and question, is life really a series of hollows that require desires from the outside to fill them? Or am I completely fulfilled? Is my fundamental nature already full and free and perfect with no addition and no subtraction to it? Is it already perfect like my Father in heaven? And therefore, do I just have to take off the various layers, shift my position and my evaluation of it, and enjoy the fullness and the sweetness of the fullness that is perpetual, something like an infinite nectar, like an infinite honey? The moment I shift that perspective, I start a unique, individual, and profound spiritual journey. Individual because my investigative steps will be according to where am I now? And how is my spiritual evolution, as it were? Where am I on the ladder of spirituality? And what is the next step I have to take? What is my individual geographic position in spirituality? Can I understand it? And do I know what I need to do? Scripture is useful in this. Teachers are useful in this. But my own integrity is useful in this. My own assessment. I know the truth about myself. I know my flaws. I know my weaknesses. And I know my strengths. The best person to assess myself is me. So I know where my starting point is on the journey. I know what I have to do. I know where I'm going. And I know that I won't always succeed. But I am happy to know that all progress is staggered. It is not linear. And I will expect some progressions, and I will expect some regressions. And I'm determined enough to go along the line of progressions. And wherever I see where a correction is required, I make the corrective action. Like driving a car, not waiting for a year when the car goes off to the left. If I do that, I'll fall in the ditch and remain there. But correcting it in situ as and when it arises. Not saying I'll do it next year. I'll do it after this life. No, you'll always be permanently in the ditch if that's the case. Learning the art of making these tuning adjustments as we go through life. So the cause of pain from Buddha's point of view is desire. Desire produces pain because it sets up an expectation based on a flawed understanding that actually a desire, when fulfilled, will give me a permanent happiness, and it won't. It's a temporary world with temporary hollows, temporary shifts, temporary ups and downs. And accepting the ups and downs is a wonderful quality of titiksha, as it's called. That is forbearance, tolerance, acceptance. Knowing that something in the past cannot be changed and something in the future has not been met yet, and we have the capacity to determine what our future will be just by this immense power of thinking, this tremendous direction of energy that we have, psychic prana. So is there a way out? Buddha says, yes. We know the cause of it. Life is painful, we know the cause of it. Similarly, we know the remedy. What is that remedy? He describes an eightfold path. In other words, simply put, without mentioning any God, without mentioning any teacher, without mentioning any name that you may have an adherence to, simply with a blank sheet, appealing to the whole of humanity, the simple fact, life is painful, and there's a way out. The cause of pain, desire. We know the cause. Obviously, we know the effect, and we know the way out is an eightfold path. No mention of any personality. No mention of any particular culture. That makes the message universal. We have to wonder sometimes why in the Western world there are more adherents toward Buddhism than there are towards, say, Vedanta. When we go through the city or somewhere else and we are dressed in the gero cloth as monks, people suspect possibly that we are the Hare Krishnas, but maybe my beard will mitigate against that. And so then they'll ask, are you Buddhist? This happened to me in the Bantry area in Cork when I was last there. And there is a beautiful Buddhist center there. So naturally, people ask, oh, are you a Buddhist? And there are Buddhists from all over the world who go there. No, I'm a Vedantic monk. Vedanta monk? What do you mean by that? What is that? Never heard of it. You say, well, Buddhism is our rebel child. That's fine. And we are older than Buddhism. However, we don't disagree with Buddhism in its northern context. We don't believe that anything is emptiness or anything like that. We're not nihilistic. We're not idealistic. But we believe that there is some fullness, not emptiness somewhere. And yet, at the experiential level, the term nirvana and the term Brahman amount to the same thing. Now, we don't tell them all of this, of course. So what is the reason why Buddhism is so acceptable? It's because there are no theologies in it. There's no necessity for ritualism in it. People register it, it's a way of life, a true way of life. We can be a member of any religion and be a Buddhist. Now we have an area of Vedanta society dedicated to the propagation of Vedanta. What is the best way of doing it? Is it to teach doctrine and dogma? Is it to highlight personalities, no matter how much we are attached to it? Is it to bring in a new culture, strange to the environment? Or is it to appeal to universality? There, Namely, we are all suffering. We are all experiencing pain, and we all want to get out of it. And there is a remedy for it. Buddhism, yoga, Vedanta, all espouse the same remedy. Buddha puts it as an eightfold path. That means I've given you four noble truths, one hand. I've given you an eightfold path. I don't need more than two hands. I don't need to know all the complexities of metaphysics. Buddha was anti-metaphysics. He wanted something simple. Just like you go to a doctor and you say, I'm suffering. What is the cause? Well, let me examine you. Cause is desire. The cause is the unconscious urge to relate to the world and try to fill it with happiness. Not filling my basket, not being able to fill my vessel ever. Then I get frustrated, and frustration itself is a pain. What to do? So the Eightfold Path is a path of combined morals, ethics. These are behavioral constructs and directions. And every religion has it. Right livelihood, right thinking, right concentration. All of these behavioral things. In other words, in the yoga philosophy, taking up this yama, this control, taking control of your life and steering it in an entirely rhythmic, ordered, structured way so that everything flows, like the electrical current, all electrons flowing in the same direction, creating a rhythm, as opposed to a scatteredness, as opposed to the image of the bird on the lower branches in the Mundaka Upanishads, randomly trying to taste the bitter and sweet fruits of life in order to get to some level of fulfillment and not finding it. But the advantage is pain is a teacher. And pain taught Buddha. Having led a sheltered life, he goes out and he sees all these events. He sees suffering. Vivekananda travels the length and breadth of India. He sees suffering. It inspires him with a revolutionary idea. Takes him away from the idea of monastic personal salvation and says, no, all this tapasya and so on and so forth, living in caves, begging for food, yes, should I not try to relieve another person's suffering? So compassion is the result of an internal awakening. Let me see the world in a different way. Let me be impelled to move toward it in a positive way, so that not only do I get fulfilled, but everyone else gets fulfilled. That is why Buddha doesn't do anything else, or he doesn't leave it at that after his own enlightenment. Instead of just leaving it there, yes, I'm sorted out in this life, I have this realization. He then goes to the deer park. He goes and he then visits his former yogic practitioners and tells them about a middle way with no extremes. And in this middle way, he then gains momentum because people see it as a reasonable thing. Extreme positions not working. So it's this middle path, the reasonable path, right meditation. And meditation has become the key to it. That is why the severance from pain, inserted here in the Bhagavad Gita, is right there it's the 23rd stanza of Dhyana Yoga, meditation. So it's purely a medical way, appealing to universal people. Vedanta also has this. It is a universal philosophy. And see how Buddhism has spread everywhere. See how Buddhism has taken the culture and the cultural norms and even religions of different geographical regions and put Buddhism there, enriched what was there with Buddhism. It happened in Tibet. That is why Tibetan Buddhism is very different from Sri Lankan Buddhism. And some may even say that Jesus was a Jewish Buddhist, I wouldn't be surprised. It was well known that they were this Jewish sect called Essenes, living a monastic life and having this ideal. And if Jesus's words are there, there's an interesting book by a man called Paul Carus, Gospel of Buddha, comparing Jesus and Buddha and the parables almost word for word if you take it. Because truth is the same everywhere. How do we make this universal? We have to teach it in such a way, in such a language with such concepts that is acceptable to all of those people being taught. Not shove something down their throat or introduce something strange. They will be averse to it. They will be put off with it. And this is the great advantage that Buddhism had. This was the wisdom of Buddhism as it spread. And really, Buddhism and Vedanta, the Vedanta is spread essentially through Buddhism. But of course, we acknowledge subtle differences with different reference points, more ancient reference points. And the language is different. And instead of saying emptiness, we are saying fullness. And instead of saying nirvana, a term that is to be found, by the way, in the Bhagavad Gita, except they add Brahman. So they said Brahma Nirvana. And that indicates that there's something very positive. Nirvana meaning the extinction of desires. When all the desires are extinct, have gone away, then you will find your fulfillment. Then you will find all pain is gone, and you'll find what is left is bliss. So let the severance from the connection with pain be known by the name of yoga. Coming back to our Mundaka Upanishad. Every instance of pain, as a teacher, inspires the bird on the lower rungs to look upward to the radiant perfected one that is on the top, that is beaming, the ideal of sublime existence. And the sheer attraction of that moves the bird up the tree progressively. And as the bird goes up, forgetfulness comes in, and the old habits come in, looking for the bitter and sweet fruits of life, tasting one which is more bitter than the rest, and that pain drives it upwards. It is pain, painful experience, that is driving the bird upwards and onwards, until finally nearness becomes oneness, because he arrives, or she or it arrives on the top of the tree, and there what does he find? His own immortal self. And there his own immortal self is that one always was radiant, was always perfect, was always full and free, was always beaming radiance, was always serene, was always content, had no desire for anything more, because you can't get anything more than fullness. That peace prayer is there, Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamaduchyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnamaiva Vashishyate. This is full and that is full. You see, you can't, something that is full, you can't add to it. You can't take away from it. It is always full. It is always free. It is always as it is. It is always pure being. It is not deficient or in any way. It has no deficit within it. And so this Buddha taught this universality of experience and a universality of remedy without bringing in a God. What a beautiful idea. And Vedanta, in its Advaitic aspect, does the same. It doesn't bring in a God. How remiss we might be if we're living amongst suffering humanity, knowing this formula and not spreading it, not educating people in it, in the very language and concepts and images and religions also that they understand. No need to bring in any foreign concept. We ourselves are humans. We don't have to persuade ourselves that we are suffering. We are suffering. And we are not acknowledging the suffering. It is like the camel chewing thorns. Krishna is giving this example. The camel chews thorns and blood flows from its mouth. But it doesn't stop. He continues chewing thorns. So let the severance from the connection with pain be known actually by this name of yoga. It's a wonderful definition. And this yoga should be practiced. That means should be repeated with earnestness. And how should we do it? Knowing that practice is not linear. Practice is fragmented. Practice has a general trend upward if we are careful about it. And we'll look out for those moments of temporary regressions and make the adjustments. So this requires perseverance and without depression of mind. In other words, without guilt, without remorse, without dwelling on the past, even if it's a moment ago. Simply not asking why not, what next, and moving on with it, with permanence. Abandoning without reserve. What should we abandon? Sankalpa prabhavan kamans tyaktva savan asheshataha manasaive nidriya gramam vinayam ya samantataha vinayam ya samantamaha tataha. Abandoning without reserve anyway all desires. Where are they born? They're born from sankalpa. Sankalpa, a previous resolve, a previous approach to life, a repetitive movement, a continuous cycle, not knowing how to get out of the cycle. What we call commonly life. And completely curbing in. By what means? By the use of our attention itself, by the faculties of the mind itself. All the senses, from all sides, we have the capability of doing it. An ordinary man like Buddha was said to do it. And when the intellect set in firmness, when it's in that condition, when it is like a steady flame, not flickering, when it is absolutely clear, let that person attain quietude, stability, steadiness, little by little, not in a rush, with the mind fixed on the internal self. Let him not think of anything else. This is meditation. That is the absolute meditation. Before the meditation, what do we require? We require the steadiness and practice. When things are jumping, when the senses are occupied, in other words, where the desires hold their sway. So to understand this, we have to go back a few passages. When the mind completely controlled, alights on or rests in the internal self, that source of the buddhi, that enlightened intellect, when it does that alone, free from desire for objects, then is one said to be established in this yoga. Just as a lamp in a windless place does not flicker, you take all the wind away, something like an unflickering flame. And that is used as a simile for the disciplined mind of a yogi. And the whole thing, all this Eightfold Path that Buddha is describing, is practicing concentration on the self. Of course, there are some preconditions brought about in the Eightfold Path, but described here as a criteria for progress. What are these? Well, don't eat too much. These are simple formulas. Right living, simple living, high thinking. Don't eat too much, but don't eat too little also. You know, the yogis say that what we have here, with two palms outstretched here, is the size of a stomach. And you should fill the one half with food at any given time. Bearing in mind there are spaces between food morsels, and we compress it through the digestive system, starting off with masticating it in the mouth and introducing enzymes and breaking it down. And then the other half of that should be air and half of that should be water. And when you look at what people eat today, you can see where these desires are. We just make it extremely upgraded. We make it sophisticated. I think in one place Swami Vivekananda says, nobody can eat food with as much gusto as a dog. But now we've refined to it. We eat in a greedy way, but we put candles and candelabras and have tables and tablecloths and have waiters serving us gastronomic delights. That's all. And you have to be moderate in all activities. Be moderate in eating. Be moderate also in recreation is necessary. And be temperate in all your actions. Regulated in sleep also and wakefulness. Don't sleep too much, but don't sleep too little either. Have a regular life. And then that becomes the destroyer of pain, becomes the destroyer of misery. This is physical, this is emotional, psychological, because you cannot separate the two. The physical and the psychological are one unit. One is coarser, one is finer, one is grosser, one is subtler. That's all the difference. But each has an effect on the other. When you're not feeling well, don't expect to fully concentrate. And when you cannot fully concentrate, you have disturbances in the mind, don't expect that the body goes along with something other than your directives. The body won't feel good, it'll feel out of balance. And when the mind is completely subdued by the practice of this yoga, this balance, this attempt for unity, when it attains this condition of calmness, quietude, contentment even, and when beholding what? This inner self, this depth aspect, this ocean within you that we call the self, by the superficial self of body-mind, then that person is satisfied. No desires are there, and only the self is alone, and therefore no pain is there. Now you may say, yes, but what about a Christ on a cross? Or what about Buddha himself, who in his last days suffered digestive problems through eating some pork to please a devotee out of love and things like that? What about Ramakrishna's cancer of the throat? What about all the suffering that great saints have? Well, they have it out of spirit of generosity for another. But the question is there, if they're able to detach their mind from the body, and if they're able to detach themselves from the mind, will they be suffering? And the answer is no, they will not be suffering. Only when they re-engage in the vehicles will they be suffering. And supreme bliss really and truly comes to that yogi whose mind is perfectly calm, whose passions are quieted. Same thing that Buddha is saying, who has become one with this cosmic, infinite, invisible that we call Brahman, and who is freed from good and evil, both pairs of opposites, pain and pleasure, good and evil, praise and blame, plus and minus, free from all that, independent of that, not associated with that. You have to constantly engage the mind in this way. And when you do so, then this yogi who is free from taint attains with great ease, with no effort, effortlessly, just gliding across the border, the infinite bliss of the contact with Brahman. What is the opposite of pain? Not pleasure. We want to transcend pain and pleasure and get infinite bliss. Infinite bliss is so much more. It's another dimension, as it were. It's a profound, limitless dimension, a contradiction in terms, no doubt, that we call this Brahman. So, perfection in this is when the mind is harmonized by all these processes, and when he sees himself in all beings and all beings in himself. Will you wage war then? Will you have arguments and difficulties then? Will you have any painful encounters then, when there's only oneness, the seer of oneness is the expression? When you see the same in all, when you see yourself in all and all in yourself, when you come to that point of realization, then you have a restive mind. You have an outlook of equanimity. So this is a formula of how to cultivate an antidote to pain, but more so, it's how to take pain as a valuable ally and say, thank you. Let me use you. Let me learn the lesson from you. Let me get more pain, is a hero's prayer. What a wonderful prayer it is. Let me take more, particularly if it is out of a spirit of sacrifice and a spirit of generosity. What is love? Love is sacrifice. That's a deep component of it. So if I love you, why don't I take your suffering on me? And as you advance in age, you can more willingly do it, surely. I'm approaching the graveyard. You have a young life ahead of you. So let me take it on me. I have nothing to lose. So there's no fear with regards to this. We don't shy away from suffering at the highest level. We welcome it. We embrace it. Give me more, please. This is incomprehensible to most people who want to escape this phenomena of pain. Pain is a great teacher. We learn much more from it. That is why the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is teaching us the valuable lesson of pain, emotional difficulties, with the prospect of a painful event and a painful scene coming to us. And the remedy is not in escapism. The remedy is in gaining, cultivating, exercising the ultimate strength. And strength is one of the greatest virtues in spiritual life. It easily combats pain. Imagine now going back to the life of the Buddha, how much courage it took for him to even engage in austerities to the point where he became a skeleton. You know, that famous statue, the famous image of Buddha with ribs showing, completely emaciated, having starved himself practically to death, and realized the only thing that's happening is the body is becoming emaciated, but there's no enlightenment from this. Let me now, independently, with a courage. What is the courage? No map, no compass, no teacher, no guidance. Just on my own, sitting under a tree, with great resolve and determination, I will not move from here until I uncover and discover the key to this question of suffering, making the whole of spiritual life a question of suffering. The yoga philosophy does it. The Upanishads do it, emphasizing that if you discover this inner self, then grief goes. If you see the self in all beings and all beings in self, the grief goes. It is gone from this exercise. And the whole emphasis in Patanjali Yoga Sutras with the language of pain-bearing obstacles. Remove the obstacles and the fullness will flow through. We'll leave it like that then for today. And we finish off with Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Yeah, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Swami.
Enjoy. Yeah.